You're watching BBC1. Now here's the news for this evening from Michael Burke.
Saddam Hussein is moving his army north to stop Kurdish rebels marching on Baghdad. Behind them, they leave the devastation of 3 weeks of civil war in the south. And South African police open fire on the ANC and kill at least 11 people. Good evening. Saddam Hussein is tonight juggling with the troops who remain loyal to him, trying to contain two separate rebellions. He's reported to be moving troops and tanks from the south of Iraq, where they've been fighting Shiite Muslims, to defend Baghdad from attack by Kurdish rebels in the north. The Kurds claim to have overrun a base near Kirkuk and captured 6 helicopters. In the south, Shiite rebels are still fighting around the towns of Basra and Karbala.
The devastation caused by 3 weeks of civil war. The town of Karbala now retaken from Shiite rebels by forces loyal to Saddam Hussein. The damage to one of the Muslim world's holiest cities is immense. Burned out vehicles litter the roads. Buildings have been damaged severely. These Iraqi television pictures are clearly meant to be a warning to other areas. The message clear that those who support the rebels will be punished. The Shiite rebel leader, Ayatollah al-Hakim, says thousands have been massacred in Karbala and other towns by government forces. He's now written to the United Nations Secretary-General asking him to intervene. In the north of Iraq, Kurdish rebels are preparing to confront elite Iraqi units on the roads leading to Baghdad. Iraqi helicopter gunships continue to harass the rebels. They say as many as 4,000 extra Iraqi troops and 80 tanks are being moved to the north to fight them. Evidence that Saddam Hussein expects the battle to be decisive. Iraq's new Deputy Prime Minister, Tariq Aziz, was briefing one of his country's oldest allies on the uprising in Jordan today, undoubtedly telling King Hussein that the Iraqi government intends fighting on. Jonathan Charles, BBC News, Tehran.
In the last few days, there have been unconfirmed reports of fighting inside Baghdad itself. Today, pictures from the streets of the Iraqi capital suggest that life there is more or less normal. There have been other reports, mainly from Iranian sources, that the city's been under curfew with thousands of people arrested. But with no Western journalists left there, the reports haven't been confirmed. More than 400 Kuwaiti prisoners of war have returned home. They were among those captured after the Iraqi invasion last August and then held in northern Iraq until an exchange of prisoners, monitored by the Red Cross and Red Crescent.
Most of those returning home today were captured by Saddam's men in the early days of the war. They spoke of 8 months in cramped, filthy cells with foul water and almost nothing to eat. Some had been beaten and tortured.
Everybody had a stick, and they wired us with electricity, and opened the electricity, and we start to see something blue in our eyes. They take my brother and beat him in front of me to let me talk. This is his way. If I didn't talk, they will take my mother.
Early this afternoon, in pitch darkness created by clouds from the burning oil wells, others released by the Iraqis faced delays and interrogation.
We want to check their IDs, where they're from, actually.
So are these non-Kuwaitis?
Most of them are non-Kuwaitis, but they have the Kuwaiti IDs.
Families waiting outside complained this was discrimination against the Palestinians and those with no formal nationality known as Badoons, who formed the majority in the Kuwaiti army.
The problem is in here with the treatment. There's 2 kinds of prisoners in here.
The screening took several hours, but appeared to be a matter of paperwork, and one by one the men walked free. The gunfire was in celebration, as at last they were allowed to rejoin their loved ones. Carol Walker, BBC News, Kuwait.
Kuwait is searching for Iraqi assets abroad. They'll be used to pay war reparations ordered by the United Nations. Kuwait's banks have reopened for the first time since the country's liberation. £1 billion worth of new banknotes have been printed. They'll replace the currency that was stolen by the Iraqis. Several hundred people have marched through London demanding democracy in Iraq. Iraqi opposition groups were represented, including Shia Muslims and Kurds. They were demonstrating their support for the uprisings throughout the country. At a rally in Trafalgar Square, speakers called for assistance for the people of Iraq.
Well, I shall be calling on the government tomorrow to provide immediate humanitarian aid for Iraq. There is a desperate need for medicines and for food, and the United Nations has already spelt out just how desperate the situation is.
Police in South Africa have shot dead 11 supporters of the African National Congress. 29 others were wounded. One police officer was hacked to death. It happened in the township of Davidton when police tried to break up what they said was an illegal meeting of about 250 ANC supporters. 17 other people died over the weekend in clashes between supporters of the ANC and the Zulu Inkatha movement.
Police would not let journalists onto the scene of the shooting, a piece of waste ground in the centre of the township. It was possible, however, to see police officers picking up a number of bodies and putting them in the back of their vehicles. Local residents looking on said ANC supporters had held a meeting on the waste ground to discuss how to respond to a rally being held that day in the township by the mainly Zulu Inkatha movement. They said the police arrived, surrounded the meeting and opened fire on the ANC supporters without warning.
They shoot each and every body. How many corpses have you seen there? About 15 corpses been shot by these police.
This version of events has been denied by the police, who said they only started shooting after they'd come under attack from ANC supporters wielding knives and axes, mortally wounding a police sergeant. Throughout the day, Inkatha supporters have been marching through the township, also armed with knives, axes and spears. The police say they'd been given permission to hold a rally, the ANC had not. Even so, the day's events have left the impression on many local residents that the police have taken sides.
The army in the West African state of Mali has fired on anti-government demonstrators for the third day in a row. Reports from the capital say more than 100 people have been killed and 1,000 wounded since Friday. The president, Moussa Traoré, said only 27 people had died, and he said he wouldn't resign. Here, the Chancellor, Norman Lamont, has said that the proposed local tax will salvage some principles of the poll tax. The Environment Secretary, Michael Heseltine, said that it will be new and fair. He also said that the government should have realised earlier that there would be problems with the poll tax.
The Environment Secretary promised a life belt to Tory MPs whose seats were threatened by the poll tax. But many voters and some grassroots Tories at Southport this weekend still seem unclear whether he really has scrapped the tax. Michael Heseltine insisted today he had, that the new local tax, including property values, would be fairer and easier to collect. He's only sorry the government didn't see the light earlier.
It would have been better if we had gone straight to the decisions we've now reached, particularly on the matter of collectability. That is a very important aspect of any tax, and it would have been better if we had seen the problem of collectability at its early stage and gone that route. That is undoubtedly the case.
Norman Lamont's budget increased VAT to cut poll tax bills and reversed other Thatcherite policies. Now the Chancellor accepts the poll tax U-turn is embarrassing, but insists the principle of everyone paying something should live on.
It is true that we are moving to a different sort of tax that will have a property element in it, that is different. But we have salvaged from the community charge something of this principle of universality.
Labour leaders believe the Tory attempt to pacify all sections of their party with the poll tax replacement will backfire.
Mr Heseltine says one thing, Mr Lamont says something else. And the Prime Minister said yesterday that Thatcher policies would continue. What is happening is that he's trying to keep the Tory party together, but every time there's a problem, he dithers about what to do with it. That's why we say we've got dithering Thatcherism governing Britain now, which is no way to get the country out of its economic and industrial problems.
But there was no dithering Thatcherism in the budget decision to reverse course and uprate child benefit. The Chancellor is unrepentant.
I think our policy was unsustainable. You can't have a benefit you're committed to review and go on freezing it. And further,
Mr Lamont insisted he hadn't ditched Thatcherism, but the former Prime Minister may be wondering which of her policies may be next for the shredder.
The former American President Richard Nixon, who's visiting Lithuania, has spoken out in support of that republic's fight for independence. but he told Lithuanian leaders they should agree to talks with Moscow.
A rousing welcome for Lithuania's most distinguished visitor since the Republic declared independence a year ago. People here hope the former president will have the ear of the foreign policy makers in the White House and of George Bush in particular. The old master of détente says he's still pro-Soviet, but the USSR must recognize Lithuania's bid for freedom.
An independent Lithuania will be a better neighbor and a better friend of the Soviet Union than a continued captive Lithuania with people bitter and hating the others. That's why I think that's something we're going for.
Moscow says it's ready now for more negotiations, and Mr. Nixon has advised the Republic's leadership to take part. But Lithuanians don't trust the Kremlin. Their parliament is still in a state of alert, and they say they won't talk until Soviet troops are withdrawn from the buildings they stormed in Vilnius 2 months ago, killing 16 people. Staff at the TV station have mounted a chain hunger strike, fasting for several days at a time in protest at the occupation of their headquarters. And once again, there's suspicion here that more attempts will be made by Soviet paramilitary troops to destabilize the situation. Over the past week, their activities have put 3 civil guards in hospital. This week, the Republic's government is introducing massive price rises here, to be followed by more increases imposed across the Soviet Union after Easter. Mr. Nixon's visit may have raised morale, but there are many problems ahead still for Lithuania. Bill Turnbull, BBC News, Vilnius.
And there are reports of heavy fighting in the Soviet Republic of Georgia, despite an agreement between the leaders of Georgia and the Russian Federation over disputed territory. It's only part of deepening political and economic unrest across the Soviet Union. A miners' strike over pay and conditions is crippling the coal industry. Steel production has been disrupted by the strike, which is already affecting more than a quarter of the country's mines. Miners' leaders in Siberia and the Ukraine have rejected the government's call for a return to work and called on President Gorbachev to resign. Here, Scotland Yard has confirmed that the fraud squad is investigating allegations of mismanagement and false accounting involving the London Marathon, following a Channel 4 television programme. Chris Brasher, the former Olympic runner who organised the event together with John Disley, tried to have the programme stopped. He says there's no fraud or false accounting. We've absolutely nothing to hide. Football, Celtic have beaten Rangers for the second Sunday in a row. Goals came from Rogan, Miller and Coyne. Rangers, who had 3 men sent off last week, lost Nisbet today. Motor racing, the Brazilian Ayrton Senna has won his home Grand Prix in Sao Paulo for the first time. Senna's McLaren shot into the lead from pole position and was pressed hard by Nigel Mansell until his Williams span out and he retired with 11 laps to go. Despite gearbox problems near the end, the defending champion held on to make it 2 wins out of 2 so far this season. Patrese was second and Berger third. And tonight's main news again. Kurdish rebels say Saddam Hussein is moving troops into the north of Iraq to fight their uprising. The Kurds claim to have overrun a military base and seized 6 helicopters. And police in South Africa have opened fire on ANC supporters in the township of Daverton near Johannesburg. 11 people were killed. A policeman was hacked to death. That's it from the newsroom this weekend. Good night.
Hello. Now this is a weather front, and this is an area of high pressure. It doesn't look much, but it will be enough to give many northern and western parts of Britain a dry week, whilst this front moves up into southern districts, at least for a time, on Tuesday and Wednesday. But tonight it's dry practically everywhere. A few spots of rain in the far northwest, but elsewhere skies clearing, some patches of mist and fog forming during the night. A cold night too. There will be a touch of frost in many areas before the morning. Tomorrow, any mist clearing quite quickly in the morning. Some spots of rain in the far northwest for a time, those dying away during the day. Most of us having at least a little bit of sunshine during the day, some places having quite a lot, but becoming very windy in some southern districts, indeed gales in the English Channel later in the day. Now watch those winds build up in the south during the course of the day. Those are the average wind speeds at midday tomorrow, and they'll build up even more after that. And those are the temperatures tomorrow afternoon, very much like they have been today. But in southern Britain, where that wind's blowing, it'll feel really rather cold, especially in the east. Typical temperatures, 9 Celsius, 48 degrees Fahrenheit. A dry start on Tuesday, but rain moving up into some southern parts of England and Wales during the day. The rest of it, though, staying dry and bright.
In family matters, up to 200,000 school-aged children have lost a parent. Many more have lost brothers, sisters or grandparents. So, what's the best way to help these children cope with their loss? Should they be shielded from the devastating reality or encouraged to face up to it and mourn with the rest of their family?
That's Family Matters tomorrow at 7:30 on BBC1.
In just under 35 minutes, actor-director Ronald Eyre puts performers through their paces for the principal parts in the story of Holy Week in That Week in Jerusalem. This is BBC1. Now, Joan Bakewell probes the question of war crimes and tries to get to the heart of the matter.